Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of Climate Coffee, where we bring you some of the most relevant news stories and why we think they're important as we come into the emergent climate economy. So, there's a few different areas that we want to address this week. We've got a couple of big reports, one from the World Economic Forum and the other from Carbon Brief, talking about both the historic events throughout 2021 and some of the future-looking risks that we have on the horizon. I'll give you a clue, climate is high across the board. We also wanted to get into the idea of double materiality in terms of, well, how is that relevant to climate risk and climate disclosures? Yes, these issues are important, but how do we really unpick them and make sure that we don't group everything together and ultimately miss the most important things here, which are driving change across finance and across business and across corporations. Lastly, we're going to look at Friends of the Earth and how they're targeting more oil and gas firms and actually how this can relate to banking. So without further ado, let's get into Climate Coffee this week. So firstly, the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report for 2022. Like last year, the report is dominated by environmental risks with climate action failure, extreme weather events, and biodiversity collapse, all in 3 of the top 10. It's not great news to start with, but it shows you how important these issues are and how they're going to be massive drivers to transition in business and in finance towards the climate economy. Carbon Brief also put out a report on how the Earth has warmed in 2021, and again, it doesn't look good. There's significant heating. Interestingly, the CMIP5 models, which they've used to look at climate-related modelling, the range fits within the band in terms of the standard deviation that they would expect within the models, but this is at the global level. And one of the things that we found through our research at SUST Global is that there are huge false negatives in some of these big global climate models, where, for example, in Redding, California, they show zero forward-looking risk, and there's been devastation caused by wildfires there. So we need to have better data, validated data, because although this report from Carbon Brief is saying that the models aren't wrong, at the macro level, they're not wrong. In minute detail, we need more granular and better data. Next, we've got 2 new TCFD regulatory updates. Last week we spoke about the ISSB and the IFRS, and they're both important, but TCFD has still been the massive driver of change, and I think there's thousands of signatories of it right now, and they are disclosing climate-related risks in a meaningful way for the first time in history, so it's still a BFD. State Street Global Advisors have committed to mandate TCFD alignment throughout companies and 30% gender diversity for the companies in the US, in Canada, in Europe, and in Australia. It just shows you this is becoming best practice for investors, along with BlackRock and some of the other big investors. This is driving real change, and shareholders they are shareholders, and they're going to keep voting on these issues at shareholder meetings in these companies, and it's going to have a massive impact, which we'll get to in a minute when we look at some of the changes that have happened in the oil and gas sector. The second TCFD story is around Canada, and Justin Trudeau has announced that they're moving towards TCFD alignment. It's going to apply to state and federal agencies, to financial institutions, to pension funds, and to corporates from 2024, following on from Japan and from the UK, who have brought it in from 2022. Again, this just shows you the TCFD is here to stay, and it's hugely important in driving change. The third article that we're highlighting in Climate Coffee this week, or the third topic rather, is actually around double materiality. So ecobusiness.com has brought out a report that highlights the drive towards disclosure frameworks, which we've just described, like the TCFD, like the IFRS, ISSB, alphabet soup, blah, 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 blah. And it is a big deal, and they're massive changes. But they argue, what about wider impact on environmental and social well-being? And actually, if we're looking at the actual and potential impacts, how does it impact on people, on society, on the environment? And double materiality is a big, important issue. Many people have strong opinions on it. I'm not invalidating one side or the other. But effectively, personally, I see it as a false dichotomy. We've seen massive improvements in terms of the TCFD, the ISSB, the IFRS, in adoption of climate-related risk disclosures. And that's a huge jump forward. And why would you want to bundle up all of these other issues in this specific area, looking at how does climate impact on these businesses? And then on the flip side, how do these businesses impact on the climate through their emissions? By muddying the water on this one specific reporting output, we're going to end up in the same situation that we have with ESG, where everybody floods into it. Nobody really understands how you pull apart environment and social and governance. All of the scores and the standardization is lacking. There's this huge confusion about what's ESG, what's not. Why is Glencore at the top of the list? Why is Coca-Cola at the top of the list? Why is Tesla at the bottom of the list? And it's not to say that these other issues aren't hugely important. We're just saying they need to be seen in a way where we can validate the data, we have standardization, and we can trust the numbers or the scores or whatever these composites are on top and make meaningful decisions whilst we understand the underlying data. So adoption of the ISSB to focus on minimization of risk and maximization of opportunity is in reality what financial firms do and what corporates do. We're not saying that there aren't ways to better align on things like society, on people and how these things are impacted, but we really need to make sure that we focus on the amazing progress that we've made in terms of climate related disclosures in organizations like the ISSB and the TCFD. So I think it's an interesting issue. There's many different takes on it, and it will continue to be an interesting issue, and it leads into the next story, which is around really unpacking the data, unpacking what's really going on at companies, and being able to call BS on a lot of the things that are promised through greenwashing. So Friends of the Earth made some pretty big waves in the industry recently. You know, they won the case against Shell in terms of calling out greenwashing, really driving change in terms of shareholders and bringing about these huge moments. And Friends of the Earth are targeting more oil and gas companies. BP, ExxonMobil, Unilever, admittedly not an oil and gas company, but a big impact and a big driver on global CO2. Basically, Friends of the Earth are saying climate promises are cheap, net zero promises are cheap, delivery is really, really hard. So, you know, these are pretty radical in terms of the broader approach to getting things done in financial markets today, and it's a good thing, and we're going to hold people to account. We need more transparency, we need more validation on what's actually getting done. And last week, this opinion piece came out from the FT, effectively highlighting that these oil and gas majors have really taken a hit. They've been vilified, they've been kind of pariahs in many ways in the broader financial community, and banks could be on the chopping block next. They really could be seen as pariahs if they don't deliver on these promises. You know, if there isn't a clear and understandable and concise way to understand where they are improving and where they are falling behind, or else basically everybody calls greenwashing, everybody calls BS, everybody says we don't believe the numbers that you're putting out. Again, that comes back into the double materiality argument. It really comes into the need for validated and concise and rigorous data, like the data that we're trying to provide at Sus Global. But you know, we really see that this beginning of the climate economy is going to be hugely important, and actually having these data standards and having these kind of rules and regulations coming in is only going to be an important thing. You know, climate will be embedded in every single activity that we do. In the same way that software ate the world in the 2000s, climate is going to eat the world in these decades, or climate tech is going to eat the world, and it will just be embedded into all of these practices. You know, we won't be talking about climate funds or climate-aware decision making. It will just be funds. It will just be decision making. This is an integral part of how we approach the future, and we really think that much of this analysis is important, much of this discourse is important, but the industry is rapidly changing, and maybe many of these standards need to be looked at with a forward-looking lens. Coming back to the WEF report at the start, these issues have to be addressed, you know, or else there's going to be significant impacts on the global economy. Please let me know what you think about this. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the Climate Coffee newsletter. It comes out every week with a bit more of a deep dive into these issues and some of those that I've left off from the video version. Thank you very much. Appreciate you joining me as ever. I'm Josh Gilbert. Catch you later. Thank you. Bye.